closed doors until we arrive at a certain element of consensus, and then it is that we bring it in, unless we determine something unusual, which is to try and press for a vote until we've got a much larger majority than we can be sure of today. We have to see what happens once we get to Geneva. So the points being made have all been taken on board, and none of us disagrees with any of them. The how we're going to play it in Geneva will have to be in accord with UN practices and not with the increasingly emotional practices of the Indian Parliament.
Being made by the Foreign Minister today. Mr. Langovan, are you satisfied when the government says that it is taking your sentiments, your views on board, but then also saying leave it up to us to do what needs to be done?
All we want is that whether India is going to support the US resolution. The form of the text of the resolution can be discussed later. But if they only say that we will, our support to the resolution depends on the text of the resolution, then it has no meaning. We want to know whether India is going to support a resolution condemning Sri Lanka for their human rights violations. What is India's stand? See, my question, I shall go one step further. India's vote is among 44 or 45 odd members' votes. It may even, the resolution may be passed without even the support of India, or the resolution may fail even with the support of India. So that does not count. We want to know what India thinks about the human rights violations that is happening in the island, for which whether they will support the resolution or not is the question. They have not answered so far.
Okay. I'd just like to bring in Callum McRae at this point, filmmaker of a very controversial documentary, Sri Lanka's Killing Fields. Your objective really in doing that video more than 2 years after the end of the war, this is a video that's likely to be screened again when that resolution comes up. What was it that you were hoping to achieve really?
Well, I mean, my job, and I must apologize for my voice, but I have a bad cold. My job is to investigate war crimes, and indeed I have mostly investigated war crimes committed by my own country and by the Western nations in Iraq and so on. But in this particular case, I was investigating war crimes committed by the Sri Lankan government. And it seems to me that that what we have to do, that clearly these crimes, this is not an academic exercise in historical accountability, that we have a situation where following the war and following the brutal repression of the Tamils by the Sri Lankan government, that repression is continuing, and there is a situation where human rights are being increasingly denied in Sri Lanka. It is sinking apparently ever deeper into a kind of despotic rule. And unless these issues are resolved, the one lesson of history is that unless the issues of justice and accountability are resolved, then you have the potential for the whole situation, in the short term, for increases in human rights denials, and in the long term, you have the clear danger that the war could start again, that a generation of young Tamils who felt that they were failed by the international community when they let these massacres happen, will feel that unless the international community takes action now to ensure that justice is done, they will have to take it into their own hands. And that would be catastrophic and awful, not just for Sri Lanka, but also for the stability of the whole region. So my job, in a sense, is to say something to the international community. And I should stress that I don't see this resolution at the UN as being anti-Sri Lanka. I see this as a resolution which is designed to ensure that the international community carries out its duty to ensure that there is justice and accountability. Now, the primary responsibility for ensuring justice and accountability is the state itself. But if the state is not doing that, and has shown after 4 years that it is neither willing nor capable of properly investigating these crimes, and I'm afraid that is the situation in Sri Lanka, and if that is compounded by the denial of the independence of the judiciary, by attacks on the judiciary, so that, for example, we've seen the impeachment of the chief minister, then what in effect it seems to me happening is that Sri Lanka is admitting that it cannot and is not willing. Therefore, it falls on the international community, and India clearly must be in the leadership of that international community to say that something must be done. And it can't put off that decision because...
Fair point, Callum McRae. Let me just bring in G. Parthasarathy once again. There's actually not been even a single piece of evidence that Sri Lanka has not rejected, whether it's video, whether it's photographs, whether it's this documentary which they claim is doctored. In that sense, do you believe Callum McRae has a point?
Well, coming from the British, given their past history of Jallianwala Bagh and dividing every place they ruled, I would take it with a pinch of salt. But what I'm saying is, yes, there were excesses, but it took place during a bloody conflict in which, don't forget, the LTTE was not a guerrilla group. It had tanks, it had artillery, it was fighting a conventional battle by the time this battle took place. More important to me, he can sit at a distance in UK and pontificate. To me, what is important is reconciliation between the Sinhalas and the Tamils. And what I want is a setup, something to emerge from the UN, where the basis is established and faults are acknowledged, not to persecute or prosecute anyone, but to bring national reconciliation. That's what you did in South Africa, and what the whites did in South Africa was horrible, but it was the statesmanship of Bishop Desmond Tutu which brought reconciliation, and you have a multiracial South African cricket team.
But
just like Muthaiya Murli,
reconciliation even possible without devolution of power, does it not come down to the point
just like Muthaiya Muralidharan is an icon in Sri Lanka, cutting across Sinhalas and Tamils. So India's aim is not some guy sitting in Britain pontificating to us given their past, but to bring reconciliation in our neighborhood. We have to do that at the UN because it is coming up there. That is why I said we should have played a much more proactive role in drafting the resolution. Second, as I said, I go back. We have to combine that with insisting that the Rajiv Gandhi Jayawardene Accord be implemented. We've been far too soft with the Lankans on that. And finally, it's all very well to say, ignore the Sri Lankan government, kick them around. If the Sri Lankan government chooses, it can deny you any access for rehabilitation of the Tamils. Do you want that? I mean, it's all right for some guy sitting in Britain to shoot
all right,
his mouth off.
Fair point. Let me just bring in Colonel Kaul at this point as someone who's been, part of the IPKF. You've served, you've even suffered war injuries and so on. Is it possible to criticize the Lankan army at this point without actually valorizing the LTTE in a way that seems to have been done, at least in some parts of the debate today in Parliament? Are we just confusing two issues over here?
See, my take on this is a little about basics of warfare. I'm a military man. All this diplomacy and talk behind doors and closed door meetings and drafting resolutions is alien to me. But nevertheless, I would like to understand as to where we are headed in this resolution. Our vote is a national vote. It is from the government of India. It is not from the government of Tamil Nadu. When you talk about government of India, then you bring in the whole country as such. That's number one. Number two is, what was our force called? Shall we just go back into history? It was the Indian Peacekeeping Force. We were there to maintain peace between the Tamils and the Sri Lankan army. That broke down when the Tamils renegated against us and started killing us. What we are doing today, I think personally, is that we are not giving credit to the 1,200 Indian soldiers, which comprises people from all over the country, not only Tamils,
right,
who were killed. 3,800 were wounded. This is the legacy we are leaving for us who have tried to bring peace into another country. And today to say that the LTT is much, and I agree with Mr. Parthasarathy when he says that they were using their own people as human shields. Well, he has heard about it. I have seen it.
I also saw it.
I actually saw it happening in the face of fire.
In the Jaffna hospital.
No, you saw it in the hospital. I saw it while actually carrying out the operation. Now, if they could not be bothered about their own people, why are we sharing crocodile tears?
Raja, come in on this, respond to that. Is there a need here to look beyond the past, beyond India's engagement with Sri Lanka in the past, and look at this as a broader human rights concern? Or would you like to address what Colonel Kaul is saying over here in terms of the LTTE and of this being, in a sense, an all-out war?
Now, firstly, I must make it one thing clear. The military action against LTTE finally turned out to be a full-scale war on Tamil people, which led to genocide and which is continuing as a structural genocide in Sri Lanka. Number one, the current approach of Government of India will give a leverage to Government of Sri Lanka to blackmail India using the geopolitical equations in South Asia. Number three, after the war in 2009, the Sri Lankan government promised four things: demilitarization, development, democratization, and devolution of powers. Sri Lankan government has done nothing so far on these four counts. There comes the question, how to strive for reconciliation. Unless you fix accountability for the horrendous war crimes and human rights violations, then only you can establish justice based on truth. That is where India needs to play a proactive role, and India should demand an impartial international investigation into war crimes and this human rights violation. And in Geneva, India should vote against Sri Lanka. Yes, it is not government of Tamil Nadu, it is government of India. You ask me Sri Lankan, he is part of the government. I understand government is a collective, and whatever is decided, it is the collective decision of the government. And he is part of the government, he is also demanding that India should vote against Sri Lanka. And government should understand this. Yes, it is not an issue of Tamil people or Tamil Nadu. It is an Indian issue. And government
Mr. Lankan, very quickly, if the government in fact does decide to abstain, or would that strain ties between your party and the UPA completely?
Definitely. See, when we see our own brethren killed in the island, we are worried. We have every right to put pressure on the government of India, though we are part of the government. We have every right to put pressure on the government of India to support a resolution against Sri Lanka. All we say is that it is in the post-war scenario, no government can kill their own people. So, as a neighboring country, and since the relationship between the Tamils in the island and the Tamils in the mainland are there, they are interconnected, we want the government of India to support them. It is not supporting one community if it is not Tamils, and if it is any other Bengalis or Assamese.
All right. You've already made that point. Yes, G. Parthasarathi,
Very simple.
Yeah.
What we should be working towards is national reconciliation. This is why I was against leaving this to the Americans. We should have joined in to produce a framework which promoted reconciliation, established responsibility without being condemnatory, and finally got the Tamils the due which they were promised in 1987. And let me just say this to Mr. Raja, with due respect, you are now critical of that military operation. Your colleague, I think it was Mr. Kalyan Sundaram, the CPI chief in Chennai, I was in regular touch with him, and he said what we did was the right thing.
All right, let's just quickly take on second screen questions. We have our audience voting in on questions. Mr. Raja, I will just come to you. Let's quickly get in our interactive platform second screen, where our audience votes on questions and sends in their questions as well. The one that's got the maximum votes at this point is, whether in fact, is it time for India to take a stand on Lanka Tamil's issue? That's the question we've already asked. But let's quickly scroll down to some of the other questions. Is Sri Lanka playing China against India? That's something that our viewers have been voting to ask our panelists very quickly.
Well, everybody plays China against us. The problem with us is we've got an establishment which runs scared of China instead of taking them on. The fact is, Hambantota port was offered to us by Sri Lanka. Instead of getting a private sector firm to do it in a commercial way, we said, sorry, we can't do it in the Chinese. They went to the Chinese. So why are you blaming the Sri Lankans?
Okay, very quickly, Manishankar Iyer, is this a question really of balancing both sentiment as well as larger geopolitical interests? And is that perhaps why we're seeing so much ambivalence from the government at the moment?
I don't